I'm Tanna Engdahl. I'm an enrolled Cowlitz member. I'm an elder, and I'm the spiritual leader of the Cowlitz Indian tribe.
Can you tell me a little bit about what your role as spiritual leader means within the tribe?
A spiritual leader, sometimes I think I'm the chief follower, but the spiritual leader sort of sets the tone of the spiritual nature of a people. I do ceremonies. I lead in ceremonies for our first salmon, our Qualistay. I'm there to open all of our tribal council meetings. I work closely with the youth program and the elders as I can. But remember, our people are scattered around the country. Basically, we have the core group that's here, that stayed here after we lost our lands. But many of our people are outside of the state of Washington in other areas. So they can tune in to our tribal council meetings once a month on the first Saturday of every month. And I open the meeting with a spiritual message. This is something that is near and dear to me because I give a lot of thought into a spiritual message, and I give a lot of prayers to hope that it reaches the core of the listeners so that they can understand their heritage, their legacy, their future, their past, their history, and basically to understand tribalism. Tribalism and tribal people are a society that have just about everything in common. They have their history in common. They have their relatives in common. They have their ancestors in common. They have their geographic place in common. They have their rivers, their mountains, their prairies, their prayers. Is a living society that is transcended from century to century to century. So that is basically what tribalism is. And since many of our people grow up outside of that zone, that sphere, we have to teach them. And sometimes the best way to teach them is through prayer.
Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Cowlitz people in this land?
We should start at the beginning, when the High God commissioned Coyote to help him with creation. Coyote danced through space and time, singing his medicine song. And the rivers began to flow, the mountains rose up, the canyons deepened. And in the middle of that, Coyote said, I need something special for the two-leggeds to come. And he created Lawetlat'la, Mount St. Helens, because he knew the two-leggeds would need a spiritual ground, a grounding place, along with all the rivers that were going to give them life. But they needed this place in time that would be a grounding place. So that would be the beginning of the Cowlitz people, and this is a time when animals talked. Instead of the myth time, as anthropologists and archaeologists call it, I call it the mist time. The mist time when animals talked in preparation for the two-leggeds that were to come. And each one provided a gift. Cedar said, I will shed my planks for them to have lodging and transportation. A beaver said, I will create an ecosystem that will give so much life that there will be many ecosystems in one. The beaver came as a water engineer beyond anything like that. The deer said, we will give our hooves, our antlers, our meat, so that they will always have something to drum with. The wolf said, they will need companionship. So I will put into the trigger of my evolution. A wolf-like animal that will bring them companionship. Cougar said, I'll do the same. The two-leggeds will look into the eyes of my descendants and understand the true spirit of creation. The flyer said, we will bring symphonies to the skies. We will sing songs that will bring awe to the angel choirs. So all of the animals gave something so that two-leggeds would have comfort on this earth. And by, they began to separate. The two-leggeds went into the gift of cedar that the cedar trees gave them and built great long houses and great canoes for transportation, as cedar prophesied. And the animals went their way to become sustenance for the two-leggeds, whether they were in the water or on land or in the skies. And the two-leggeds grew more and more sophisticated as they become better and better at hunting and creating. But one thing that the two-leggeds held reverence for, of all the four-leggeds and the flyers and the swimmers, was the reverence that they would never waste anything. So they used everything that was given as food and ceremonial objects. And we still have that today. We try to teach our people to waste nothing, to make use of everything. Our mountain continues to teach those things. Our mountain, with its great harvests of so many plants and medicines that they give us as Cowlitz people now. And we try to remember to waste nothing. Everything goes back to the earth. When we have our salmon ceremony and we roast the salmon and we go through ceremony of prayer and gratitude, and we tell the Salmon Nation that we remember our pledge. When you promised to give life and keep us alive, we would try to take care of all of you and keep you alive on this earth. So our Cowlitz people have gathered resources to pay back and continue our pledge to the Salmon Nation. We have spent millions upon millions upon millions of dollars on this land in the Southwest Washington to rehab streams so our salmon will live, so they'll have a place to come home to give birth, to cherish the area that will eventually give birth to their progeny and go back to the ocean and come back again. It's cyclic, these seasonal rounds that we live by. We live by that rhythm even today. We live by the rhythm of the suns and the moons. We live by the rhythms of the seasons. I don't know what to tell you about Cowlitz history other than that whole cyclic time was interrupted when the new people came. And at first, they came with the fur trappers, Hudson Bay, and they were people like us. Basically, they lived on the land and of the land. They were mercenaries in a way because they recognized the value of beaver pelts. And they worked for a company that cherished trade. So we began to trade in exchange for the beaver pelts, which mighty ships picked up and mostly went to London and to China. China was a big market of our Northwest native furs. And that time was the time when these trappers that came in and the administrators that came with them and the people that come with a huge company, they married Cowlitz women. And so our bloods started to become mixed with European blood at that time. But for those first centuries, it still lived like native people because the people that married Cowlitz women lived like native people. Eventually, they started to build little homes, and our native women started to go into much like a plank house, but smaller. But it was for one family instead of many families. By and by, more people wanted to come, not for the furs or the resources, but for the land. There's an old saying that the Spanish came for our souls, the British came for our resources, the Americans came for our lands. And they did come for the land, and they took it. So our people were scattered because there was a time, in the treaty time, when a territorial governor by the name of Isaac Stevens, his mission out here in this country was to establish treaties as quickly as possible and also to survey for a railroad to come out here. Back in the East, at a time we didn't know about, people in the East coveted land west, and especially as tensions grew between the North and the South, the Lincoln cabinet wanted to stop slavery from moving west. So they apportioned land if people would be brave enough to go west and establish a farm. And they would be given that land if they worked it for so long. But never enough land that would support a plantation where slavery could continue to thrive. Well, they passed several acts, 2 acts, 1862, the Homestead Act and the Railroad Act. That was the nail on the coffin for us. People had been coming out here anyway. And because they had rifles and because they had superiority of manifest destiny, which they felt they were right in taking Indian land because Indians did not deserve their own lands. So they took them as much as they could, and when the Homestead Act and the Railroad Act was passed, that was a license. Well, even before it could be indoctrinated, people were taking Indian lands. They felt that was a license to take the lands. Back to Isaac Stevenson, who came out here to effect treaties. He did so in a very limited jargon, a trade jargon, which is limited number of words. And he was trying to explain an interpretation, because just about all native tribes could understand the jargon because it was used for trade. You didn't need a complex language, just trade language. They tried to explain the treaty rights that natives would keep by giving up most of their lands, but retaining so much for themselves. The Indians were not given land. They had the land. They gave up a great deal of the land to retain some for themselves, and it was called a reservation. When the when the natives quite understood what they had signed away, they began to fight back. They were so angry. It was a time about 1855, 1856, which they call the Indian Wars. During that period of time, the people here, Southwest Washington, the pioneers who had begun taking the land in the first place, became frightened. So the government at that time, territorial government, rounded up natives and put them, for us, there was an incarceration place, what we call Cowlitz Prairie, where a lot of our people were living, and an incarceration place at Fort Vancouver, where a lot of our people were living that were within reach of Fort Vancouver, and then sometimes even in the village, Kanaka Village. So they were interred, basically imprisoned. And when released from that, they went home to find their livestock gone. And a lot of times they faced the business end of a rifle, saying, "You don't belong here, this is my land," meaning the new people saying to the Indian, "This is my land." And so the Indians were in a situation trying to survive and take care of families. They still had a little bit of their seasonal rounds left, and they continued that where they could, but a lot of the lands were suddenly fenced off for the hunting and fishing that they depended on. They had to go quickly from a world based on seasonal resources to something called a paycheck, in which they were a little bit more than indentured servants. They were given a check on an economy that they had to become used to and try to support their families. Many left to go other places. They worked as loggers, they worked in farms and as laborers in the logging industry, wherever they could find work. My grandmother was a laundress. She took in washing. Many Native women washed clothes, kept house for the new people. So that part of our history is painful. But the Cowlitz, being Cowlitz, they understood that most of what happened to them was because of some sort of paper edict. And the Cowlitz began to study paper. The missionary women that came out, the missionary teachers, came out to, of course, teach the children how to give up their paganism and become good Catholics for the most part, but to become good Christians. But that element of learning became ingrained in the Cowlitz. They learned and learned and learned. And even from those meager tribal meetings in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they would bring a few pennies, bring a nickel or something, and put in a pot to educate a Cowlitz student. That has been a passion for the Cowlitz that's almost fire-bearing. It is so strong to get an education. And I guess that was our answer for the survival, was to get an education. So we went through many periods, but we got smarter and smarter and smarter in a world of paychecks, having to leave our seasonal rounds behind. I should tell you that there was also a terrible, terrible time in the 1830s, 1829, 1830, 31, 32, 33, when we were afflicted by disease brought in by the newcomers. And for a population here in Southwest Washington, in all of our major strongholds, we lost about 98% of our population, between 90 and 98%. Every living Cowlitz today owes their lives to a survivor. And from that time of survival, going back to being driven about education and being driven about, since we did not sign a treaty and we were not federally recognized, at that time we were so determined to gain that recognition without a treaty. And I should tell you, during those treaty times, the Cowlitz were offered a treaty. 1855, Chehalis River. A lot of the tribes met here in the western side, mid part of the state, to the southern end of the state. These were the tribes that were not in treaties around the Puget Sound area. So they brought the treaty making to that point, on the Chehalis River. But the deal we were promised, we'll give you a reservation, but not here. We want you to go to the coast, live in the coast, live in the ocean environment, next to a tribe called Quinault. And Quinault and the Cowlitz are not friendly. In fact, some had even called them enemies. We wouldn't want to go live near a tribe that hated us, did not like us, but also into an ocean environment. It would have been a death spiral. All of our chiefs, sub-chiefs, refused to leave our land here. This territorial governor took off in a rage and left us hanging. Well, we discontinued our ways. But the new people kept coming in as they believed they're right under manifest destiny. And then that brings us back to when we did truly lose our land. And of course, we'd lost most of our people. I don't think I told you about our strongholds back in the day of our upper Cowlitz, lower Cowlitz, Qualhioqua Cowlitz, and Lewis River Cowlitz. Our upper Cowlitz were the Cowlitz of the mountains, up around Randall Morton, a little bit north and east of Mount St. Helens, but they were the true hunters and gatherers of the mountain goats, those upper rivers. The lower rivers were the Salish, or the lower Cowlitz. We had 29 villages on the Cowlitz River alone. We were great at fishing, tremendous fishermen with our weirs and nets. The end of winter, we had what you would call smelt, we call qualistay. That was our salvation fish. They come at the end when our stores, our food stores were so low. They have so much nutrition in those tiny bodies, a lot of oil. So we were replenished. We had to smoke everything because there was no ice, no Costco. Everything had to be smoked. So the Qualhioqua Cowlitz were those who lived in the west, what we call the mountain Cowlitz, in the Wheelapaw Hills, that area. They spoke about Athabascan. And then we had the Lewis River Cowlitz. The upper Cowlitz, the Lewis River Cowlitz spoke Sahaptin. The Qualhioquas spoke Athabascan, and the lower Cowlitz spoke Salish. One of the reasons, I think, and my cousin, another historian, Mike Isle thinks, and his brother, who is now the chairman, Bill Isle is the chairman of the Cowlitz Indian Tribe. We believe that the Cowlitz were so multilingual that when unknown people came into the territory, they would try different languages on them, trying to find one that they might recognize. And so they confused us with the Klickitat, and a lot of tribes even into Oregon, south into Oregon, confused us with the Chinook, who also were speaking a different language. And so they didn't think of us as Cowlitz, so they were talking right to a Cowlitz person who was using all these different languages trying to communicate, so they misidentified us so often. So we have found a lot of our history in footnotes of journals, history journals, and would trace it to its source. Found out they were really talking about Cowlitz, which also had a lot of different spellings. When I was a child, very young, it might have been the Upper Cowlitz, it might have been the Sahaptins, maybe the Salish, but they were trying to teach me how to say Cowlitz in a native Indian dialect. And they would kind of make my throat go through the gyrations that would sound like, Galajak, Galajak. Now, how would you spell that? So Cowlitz became spelled in so many different ways that there was always confusion. It took us a long time to get federal recognition because we had to gather all of that information basically ourselves and go through a very stringent process, the federal recognition process, which now I think if even treaty tribes had to go through that process, they might not become recognized. Going back to the mist time, of course, our relationship with the mountain was there for the centuries to come. But it is our sacred mountain. So we go there for visions, vision quests. We go there to feel the energy of the mountain. We know the element of this mighty, beautiful snow queen, Lawetlat'la, is alive. As we understand, Native people understand that everything is alive. Our rock nations from those great mountains are alive. All life is basically alive, and Native people understood and respected that. And we understood in the old legends how the mountains around formed a triangle of intrigue. Katu, Mount Adams, Tahoma, Mount Rainier, Lawetlat'la, Mount St. Helens. Of course, they had stories of inter-mountain strife, mostly jealousies. And whatever person is telling the stories, the dueling women, Tahoma, Lawetlat'la, might have been fighting over Mount Adams, Katu, as a husband of one or a fiancé of one and jealous by the other. So there was always the stories and legends. But the Cowlitz never had any doubt who would win any intermountain war, because Mount St. Helens had fire within her body. And so that had to be respected too. The mountain has erupted many times in centuries and centuries of life, and continued to be the respected being that the mountain was and is So we still go to the mountain for that, for those energies, and understand the sacredness of her being on this earth. She is surrounded by rivers that further give us life, life-sustaining beings that brought nourishment, sustenance to us. The mountain being sacred was also a confessional. Go to the mountain for several things. One, in the vision quest for our young, basically to connect with who they are, who they were to be, what in nature would give them knowledge and give them basically wisdom, the wisdom of the earth. We might call it earth sciences now, but we would call it living, how to live, how to behave in life. Those vision quests served to bring a connection to the young two-legged and to all the wisdom of the earth, whether they found their totem strength in eagles, ospreys, hawks, or on land, if it was bear, cougar, wolf, even cedar could be a totem of giving strength and knowledge. Young girls would learn to find something that would give them strength and knowledge of how to take care of families, how to weave baskets, how to prepare meals. A vision quest was a very strong time in a young person's life where they learned how to be. As in the elders and those that were getting ready to join the ancestors, they might go to the mountain to sing their last song, to talk with the mountain about when they were going to join the ancestors on the banks of ancient rivers and how they would support their descendants from the vantage point and the wisdom of being an ancestor. Our ancestors never go into oblivion. Our ancestors are living not only within us, but beside us, giving us wisdom, helping us. One of our weapons toward recognition that no one understood is that our ancestors were there with their ancestral power to keep us going, to continue that passion of being Cowlitz and never give up, never give in, never turn back. So the mountain gives us that grounding, that basic strength.
Were you here in 1980 during the last big eruption?
No, I was not. I was working for the Bureau of Indian Affairs back in Washington. My uncles were out here, my cousins, my family. I called for days and hours trying to get through, as the rest of America was trying to get through as well. Our telephone lines were jammed. As it turned out, my relatives were all safe. I was watching the news. Of course, our eyes were on the news constantly. And basically on CBS, there was an interview of my uncle. And he was talking about why our mountain was angry. And a lot of it had to do with how we were treated. But, of course, it was just a short interview. But I knew he's okay. His very strong curmudgeon self. But for those that were out here, the suffering was acute, and the damage was beyond almost understanding. So many, not just the ones who lost their lives, but people's fields were destroyed, that, their crops were under cover of ash. Took years, it's probably still taking years for the regrowth and the forests coming back. Mountain goats are coming back in strength. A lot of wildlife, a lot of plants, medicines have recovered.
So the eruptions of 1980 and again in the early 2000s are strong in recent memory, but like the Cowlitz people have been here for centuries. So do you have any wisdom about coexisting alongside the mountain that you would like to share with everyone for the future?
Oh, they have idioms, go with the flow. We had to be here in the presence of such a mighty force. We learned how to live. We learned how to live, period, on this earth, with the rivers and the harvests and the seasonal rounds, the mountain with fire in it. I know now they have sciences that study these things. They have monitors on the mountain that are so sensitive they feel every movement of the mountain. They all are, I think, communicative with each other about their findings and so forth. For our Cowlitz people, what's important to us here, whether it's at the base of the mountain or climbing higher up into the mountain, is we want our hunting and fishing rights back. We want to fish our rivers the way we used to fish our rivers, without strong barriers and denials by regulatory agencies. We want our hunting rights to be able to harvest the four-leggeds in such a way as to go back to feeding our families. It's going to be very important. I understand in the next number of years, forest fires are claiming so much of native lands. We used to have fire keepers, and we kept our prairies under control. We kept our forests under control. We never had fuel buildup to the point now when there's fire, it's catastrophic. We worry about our mountains, of course, our forests, and but pretty much we still come to the rivers for our ceremonies. We still come to the mountains. Sometimes feel the energies, to touch our ancestors. It's like you're asking me, how do you breathe every day? What is your association with breath? What is your association with getting up in the morning and opening your eyes? What is your association with hearing the vibrations of the earth? How do you answer that? The Cowlitz have been here for so long. The Cowlitz just is. It was, and it is, and it will be. That's why we pay so much attention to our young, so that one day one of our youth will be sitting here in this chair trying to answer a question like, how do you breathe every day? What is your association with life? What is your association with a mountain that's been with you always? What is your association with the rivers that carried you always? How do you explain always to a person that's not Cowlitz? I don't know how to answer your question. It makes no sense to me.
Is there anything more about the relationship or your history here that I haven't asked about that you would like to share?
there's probably not much that I haven't just talked your leg off of. I think I covered a lot of the terrible times in our past. Our future is strong in our youth and in the continuation of our ancestors. So I don't worry so much about the continuation of the Cowlitz. It's as strong as this mountain, Lawetlat'la. It is as strong as the rivers that continue to run. It is strong as the heartbeat of the Cowlitz people.